Hello friends, and I welcome all of you to this course titled as British Poetry. We are on Unit 5 discussing John Milton's invocation to Book 1 and Book 9. Friends, in the last class we discussed two very important topics. One was blank verse. Why Milton has chosen blank verse for writing this poem Paradise Lost. The another one was the concept of original sin. Now, what does this concept of original sin means? What are the repercussions of eating fruit of knowledge? If human beings get the liberty to choose between right and wrong, good and evil, whether it is going to benefit them or whether it is going to harm them, all these things were discussed in detail in the last class. In this class, we are going to look at this text with a very different kind of angle, a theoretical perspective, feminist literary theory. We will discuss here about the character of Eve as the first feminist in the history of humanity. How Eve is different from other characters, and how Eve can be considered as first feminist. But before moving to this topic, I wish to tell you that what you are going to learn, or the lecture outcome of this 30 minutes lecture, you would be able to illustrate the character portrait of Eve through feminist perspective. What is feminist theory? How is it applying to the character of Eve? What is the detailed character analysis of Eve? And how Eve is related to the modern feminist criticism? Let us discuss all these aspects in the light of this text, Paradise Lost. Eve in Paradise Lost is vain, vulnerable, and evidently intellectually inferior to Adam. Friends, these are not the allegations on the personality of Eve, but John Milton has portrayed female character into that manner only. We are going to see in this text that Eve is intellectually inferior to Adam, a subordinate of Adam, at a vulnerable position. She is dependent on Adam, and Adam is treating Eve as her master. However, Sandra M. Gilbert is a critique, feminist critique. Sandra M. Gilbert argues that though Milton portrays her as a weak character, he also puts her on a par with Satan in her refusal to accept hierarchy, and because of her ability to move the plot of Paradise Lost forward. Friends, now this critique, feminist critique, believes that Eve do not want to live under, let's say, anyone's patriarchy or anyone's mastery. Somewhere, Eve is at par to Satan when she refuses to accept hierarchy. There is another importance of Eve, that she is the one who moves the plot of Paradise Lost forward. Because in the climax scene we see that Eve has eaten the fruit of knowledge. Although John Milton declares that Paradise Lost will primarily examine man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world. These are the lines quoted from Book 1, Part 2, lines 1 to 3. He explores these matters through the narrative that focuses on two paradigmatic rebels. Friends, when we look at Book 1, we see that book is examining man's first disobedience. So, maybe John Milton is trying to say that women's identity can be considered into the identity of men. So, women is different from men, but on the same time dependent on men. And when we read these lines, that of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste means as soon as you eat the fruit of knowledge from the forbidden tree, you will become mortal. Because prior to eating this fruit, Adam and Eve were immortals. Death cannot touch them. They will never grow old, continue to live their life with comfort in the paradise. But eating of this fruit of knowledge brought death into the world. Now, the human beings are mortal. They have to face the problems of life, the problems of old age, weakness, death, and evil. When these matters are explored through the narrative in Paradise Lost, there is a focus on two paradigmatic rebels. Let us read about those two paradigmatic rebels. Satan, the once brilliant angel who falls through his explicit refusal to accept the hierarchy of heaven, and Eve, the supposedly submissive mother of mankind. This reference is taken from Book 1, line 36, whose implicit refuses to accept the hierarchy of Eden. Friends, when we look at the personality of both Satan and Eve, we feel that both do not want to live under hierarchy, under mastery of someone else, which is why Satan leaves heaven and falls on hell. He do not want to live under the mastery of God. On the other hand, Eve do not want to live under the mastery of, let's say, God or hierarchy of Eden. What is the hierarchy of Eden? The hierarchy of Eden is that Eden is the garden. Eden is the garden of paradise. The hierarchy of Eden is that Eve must take commands from Adam. Eve must live with the order of Adam. And Eve do not wish to accept that, let's say, mother of mankind kind of image. She has her independent identity. She thinks in a different manner, which is why she do not want to accept the hierarchy created by God, where Adam is superior and Eve is inferior. There are, of course, other key characters in the unfolding tale. God the Thunderer and his gentler son, who sacrifices himself for humanity. Friends, when we talk about this book Paradise Lost, we see that there is an unfolding tale in the story, where God is considered as thunderer, and his gentler son Adam sacrifices himself for humanity. How? Adam is the one who eats the fruit of knowledge after Eve committed that mistake. So, in this way, Adam sacrifices for Eve. On the other hand, the Son of God, Satan, sacrifices the Son of God is Christ, sacrifices himself for humanity. And in this way, Christ is considered as a male who is superior to a female. Sin and her son, death, who together will make humanity their prey. So, when we talk about, let's say, sin and her son, there is some kind of death which is together going to make humanity their prey. God's angelic messengers and even Adam, the first and presumably noblest of men, but Satan and his victim, or perhaps his double, Eve, are the actors who move the plot forward at every point. When we, friends, talk about this story, Paradise Lost, we see that the angelic messengers of God, whether it is Raphael or other, let's say, good angels, and even Adam, the noblest of men, they do not move the plot ahead, but the plot is moved ahead by Satan and his victim Eve. Or we can say that Eve is the replica of Satan. Both are the rebellious souls, Satan and Eve, who are, let's say, moving the plot forward at every point. And in this way, we can say that Eve's character is more important than Adam's character in the story. When Adam is involving himself into discussions with good angels, dialogues with good angels, Eve is doing action. So, action is required more to move the story forward as compared to mere dialogues and discussions. Extraordinarily, the 12 books of Paradise Lost expand on just a few verses of the Old Testament. Friends, when we look at, let's say, the 12 books of Paradise Lost, we see that they are just the expansion of few verses of Old Testament. How? Let us read. First, those explaining God's formations of men, his creation of the garden, in which stood the forbidden tree of knowledge of God and evil, and his birthing of women from men's rib. Then those dealing with the subtle serpent's temptation of Eve. When we look at this book Paradise Lost, we see that Eve is born from the rib of Adam. So, woman is formed from the rib of men, thus inferior to men. And the tree of knowledge of good and evil is also a kind of, let's say, creation of God, which God has created in the Garden of Eden. Maybe he should not have created it, then this act would not have been committed by Adam and Eve. So, the temptation by the serpent to Eve is something which was the destiny of Eve. Around these passages, Milton develops a drama of discord between heaven and hell that shapes his epic of disobedience. Friends, when we talk about, let's say, this story, Paradise Lost, we see that Milton is trying to develop a drama of discord between heaven and hell. Let's say, what are the expectations of heaven? Or what are the expectations of hell? Is the disobedience created by heaven, or let's say it is created by hell? We can say that the hierarchy created in heaven is also responsible for this disobedience, because Eve do not want to, let's say, accept the supremacy of God in paradise. Why God want to become supreme? This is the question which Milton is raising here, and thus God is equally responsible for this disobedience in the story. The complexity with which he imbues both Satan and Eve is nowhere to be found in Genesis, where we are simply told that after the serpent's false assurance, the women saw that the tree was good for food and a tree to be desired to make one wise. She took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. This is taken from 3.6 of the book of Genesis, line number 6. We see that in this line, in the book of Genesis, it is simply written that first Eve eats the fruit of knowledge, and then she gives that fruit to Adam, and then Adam eats the fruit of knowledge. The things are not so complexly described in the book of Genesis as it is done in this book, Paradise Lost. From St. Augustine to Emilia Lanier, writers throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance had mediated on Eve's role in the first disobedience. Friends, those who are Christian, those who are, let's say, fond of theology, they had explored again and again, from St. Augustine to Emilia Lanier, that why in that time of Middle Ages, in the time of Renaissance, Eve is created in a role of disobedience. Why not Adam has eaten the fruit of knowledge? Why Eve did that mistake? Is the, let's say, theology trying to say that females are more foolish than males? What does it suggest? The discussion is endless. But it was Milton who, even while emphasizing her spatial culpability, gave her character spatial depth, including paradoxical power and exceptional poignancy. Friends, when we talk about this book Paradise Lost, we see that Milton has given spatial, let's say, weightages to the personality of Eve. The paradoxical power, exceptional poignancy which is given to Eve make her more important than Adam in this book Paradise Lost. From the start, however, the poet emphasizes the hierarchical distinction between Adam and Eve. The primordial pair, as Satan, journeying to Eden, bent on revenge against God, first view them Adam and Eve are. When we, let's say, talk about the hierarchical distinction which is created between Adam and Eve in the poem, we see that Satan's journey of Eden to take the revenge against God, let's say, is viewed by Adam and Eve in a very different, let's say, perspective. Let me quote 4 or 5 lines from book 4 to make you understand what was their perspective. Not equal as their sex, not equal seemed, for contemplation he and valor formed. for softness, she and sweet attractive grace. He for God only, she for God in him. His fair large front and eye sublime declared absolute rule. Friends, when we read this line, we see that God is supreme for Adam and Adam is supreme for Eve. So Eve is twice removed from the grace of God. For her, Adam must behave like a God, superior to Eve. And in this absolute hierarchy system, Eve is considered as the inferior most. While Eve, with hair disheveled, in wanton ringed, appears in image of coy submission, modest pride. We see that Eve is, let's say, earlier considered as a disheveled kind of personality, dependent kind of personality. And later she appeared with a coy submission, a happy kind of, let's say, submission, and a modest kind of pride into her appearance. With her lower status, disheveled hair, and wanton ringlets, the reader is prepared by the poet quite early on to imagine Eve as a potential problem. Despite the blissfulness with that hand in hand they passed, the lovelier pair that ever since the love's embrace met. So, we see that Adam and Eve are considered as, let's say, embracing each other. Hand in hand they have to pass from that place, because both of them had a destiny of downfall. They have to migrate from paradise to earth. But in the earlier situation, they do not know all these things. They are innocent before eating the fruit of knowledge. Within a few pages, as we learn more about the mother of mankind, she becomes even more problematic. Friends, as soon as the story moves ahead, we are able to identify the complex, let's say, behavior of Eve. How the mother of mankind is different in her feminist perspective. In an apparently loving dialogue with Adam, Eve relates her memory of her birth from his rib. There is a scene where Eve is remembering her birth from the rib of the Adam. Let us read it from the poem, how it is portrayed. After she awakened, she went to look at herself in a clear, smooth lake, and was entranced by her own image, much like a female version of the mythical Greek Narcissus. Friends, when Eve is born and she looks at her image in the lake, she falls in love with herself. She felt that kind of, let's say, narcissism, self-love, which exists in the Greek philosophy, appeared into the personality of Eve. When an airy voice warns her that what there thou seest, fair creature, is thyself, but follow me, and I will bring thee to him whose image thou art, she spies Adam and runs away, having thought him less fair than that smooth, watery image of herself. When Eve was, let's say, falling in love with herself, there is a voice which comes from air, suggesting that Eve must not, let's say, love herself, rather she should love God and the existence of God. And when Eve looks at the personality of Adam, she runs away, thinking that Adam is not beautiful and fair as Eve is, and which is why it suggests that Eve had that kind of superiority complex in herself since her birth. In fact, Adam has to remonstrate with her that she is his flesh, his bone. When Adam explains this statement that Eve is his flesh, his bone, it suggests that Adam is superior to Eve. Only after she surrendered herself to him does she accept that beauty like hers is excelled by manly grace and wisdom, which alone is truly fair. Friends, when we look at this poem, these lines, that excelled by manly grace and wisdom which alone is truly fair, it suggests that Adam has to struggle for his superiority. When Eve surrenders herself to Adam, this is the time when this beauty belongs to, let's say, Adam and not to Eve. And wisdom which alone is truly fair. Now Adam is trying to justify that wisdom is superior to external beauty, and he is expecting a complete devotion from the side of Eve. Acknowledging that Adam is both her author and disposer, she proclaims that God is thy law, thou mine. To know no more is women's happiest knowledge and her praise. Eve do not want to, let's say, accept the superiority of Adam. Rather she consider God as, let's say, her disposer. Eve consider God as superior most, suggesting God is thy law, thou mine. To know no more is women's happiest knowledge and her praise, suggesting that women's happiest knowledge and her praise is in her devotion towards men. But Milton makes it even clearer that Eve is Adam's intellectual inferior, as Adam declares God on her bestowed. So friends, there are references in the poem where Milton is, let's say, clarifying it, that intellectually, maybe physically, Eve is more beautiful than Adam, but intellectually, Eve is inferior to Adam. And that is visible in these lines of Book 8. And I quote, "Too much of ornament in outward show, elaborate of inward less exact. For well I understand in the prime end of nature, her the inferior in the mind and inward faculties." So, these lines suggest that the mental state of Adam is superior to Eve, and Eve can be considered as ornamented, external beauty having, let's say, external appearance, but inward beauty lies in the intellectuality that Adam consists in himself. In this way, Eve is more vulnerable than Adam to the schemes of Satan. Friends, we can say that Milton is trying to create an image of Eve who is, let's say, a foolish character. Although softly we can say innocent, but Eve is, let's say, foolish than Adam, which is why she caught herself into the schemes of Satan. One night, squat like a toad, the fallen angel crouches by her ear and inspire her with a prophetic dream in which she flies witch-like through the sky and desirous views the forbidden tree with fruit surcharged. So, these lines suggest that there is an angel who, let's say, gives this voice in the ear of Eve while she is sleeping, that there will be one day when she can fly like a witch in the sky, and she can desire the forbidden tree with fruit surcharged. So she can eat that fruit of knowledge from, let's say, her free will, from her independence. Still, though, the seeds of disobedience have been planted in Eve almost from the moment when she was shaped from Adam's rib. She continues for a while to preside over Eden like the good housewife she has meant to be. Friends, Milton is trying to create the image of a good housewife in the personality of Eve in the Garden of Eden. Although there is, let's say, seed of disobedience which is planted in Eve almost from the moment when she was shaped from Adam's rib, suggesting that Eve was born to commit that sin, she continued for a while to preside over Eden. For some time, Eve had to live in Eden, and she did it. Like a good housewife, she was meant to be. So, when Eve was living in Eden, she was performing all her duties of a good housewife. But after some time, because she was not intellectually strong, she committed that sin of eating the fruit of knowledge, and which is why Adam also eats that fruit later, and the downfall of human beings and the death is introduced in the life of human beings because of the foolishness of Eve. So friends, we can understand that when we look at personality of Eve from a feminist perspective, we see that Milton has intentionally created the Eve with some kind of inferiority complex in herself. That is all for today. Thank you for listening.